What makes Lion's Wealth different than other financial planners and investment advisory firms? That is the question that we are going to answer today as it pertains to investments. Welcome. It is nice having you. You know, when I look at the last couple decades, investments have become a lot more commoditized. And what I mean by that is that on average, investments are looking a lot more similar in their characteristics. Well, that's not exactly a bad thing, especially when we have the stock market going up roughly over 70% of the time. But what happens in those other 30% of the time? That's what's really important, because you see, we have had many different things happen in just in the last couple decades alone with respect to the stock market. We have had COVID, so that has produced this massive shock to the stock market, albeit very shortly lived. But then we had 2018, where we had this really just horrific kind of a collapse into year end of the stock market that happened before we had a rebound. Well, before that we had 2014, 2015, that we had this environment where the stock market wasn't really going anywhere. We've had the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009 that led into basically the recession of that point in time, which you called the Great Recession. We've had, well, going back to 2001, 2002, the tech bubble, and it keeps going. So you can see that even though the stock market goes up over 70% of the time, there have been some really interesting periods of time that they have not gone up, and so much so that we have had some of the worst performances of the stock market that we have seen since the Great Depression. So what does that mean to you, and what does that mean to your investments and the environment that you find yourself in with your financial planner? That is what I want to be talking about today with respect to the Lion's Wealth difference. Let's dive into some details here, and I'm going to be explaining what this means to you and why it's important for your financial future. I am pulling up my screen right now to share with you the process that we go through here at Lion's Wealth Management. Now, the first thing you are going to realize is that there's a lot of information here. So we go through the data, and this is something that we do on a daily basis. You see, we use Hedgeye Risk Management to pull all the data together for us. Now, we have them on retainer, and the firm specializes in that one thing, risk management. So they look at the data, they pull together the data, and when we figure out whether we should be in a growth mindset or a risk management mindset, then we can start to figure out the correct investments. So while we are looking at all of the information here, we start going one step farther. So we put that data into more manageable type of environment for looking at and to understand. So the data that we are updating on a daily basis then goes into just the expectations for the stock market based upon the expectations of the economy. Now, this is actually showing the economy, so forward thinking of where the economy is going from where it has been as well. So there's changes that are occurring, and again, these changes are happening on a daily basis. Well, not only changes with the economy, but then we also go into the same exact aspect with changes in inflation. So we model out the economy, we model out inflation, and with that basically information, we start to look at then what I call the lead index. That's the Lion's Wealth economic activity and development stages that we can go through. Now, we have 4 stages. Stage 1 is actually showing that we have a lot of growth in our economy, but not a lot of inflation. This is where economies boom. This is one of the best environments for economies to be in, and translates to the stock market many times as well. Lead 2. So the lead stage 2 is right where we have actual growth happening in our economy, but we also have inflation. This is where economies flourish. So we have the booming of economies, the flourishing of economies. Still a great place to be in, not only for the economy's sake, but also many times for the stock market as a whole. Well, then we have what I call lead 3. This is where economies go to stagnate. We have not a lot of growth that's happening, but we still have high inflation. Now, there's been many times in history that we have been in this environment, and this is where stagnating over time, economies don't work as well. And you can start seeing that over and over with different types of people and how they are trying to deal with inflation. Now, the fourth and final stage of the lead stages really reflect on the fact that we have a slowing of growth and a slowing of inflation. Over time, now maybe over many years, especially in the US, this is where an economy can go to die. Now, you see this with other economies and countries around the world, and the US is very unique because we can be in a sustained period of time in this environment and we can still come out of this very well. However, is that the stock market may not follow suit when we are in these types of environments. So on a whole, this environment with a lead 4 may actually produce more of those kind of sideways markets, a lot more choppy markets, and ones that we need to risk manage than say what a lead 1 would. So when we know where we're at, then we start to go into this next graph here, starting to say what works in any environment. So any of those 4 lead stages that I'm talking about here, when we backtest through history, what actually works, what's doing well, and what can we be invested into today to make sure we are actually going to be growing in the future. That is what we want to be setting ourselves up for. So this is, well, not a guarantee, but on the same lines, this is saying the statistical likelihood, so going back to those numbers, the statistical likelihood that we can grow in this environment, or on the flip side, protect in this environment, goes up dramatically when we know what investments work in this environment that we're in. Okay, so we've already gone through a lot of information. We've gone through the details of just knowing where the economy is going and some of the details of that manner. We've gone into how we look at the lead indexes because of the fact of where we're projecting the economy to be going in the future, as well as inflation in the future. We know exactly what investments work well or better than others in those types of environments. Now we come back to looking at what we call the signal. Now the signal is what says, is this going to be a good one to own for the short period of time or for a long period of time? And what you can actually see is some investments that you could be in this environment may not actually be a long-term investment, but it may be one that's going to be the correct one for today. Well, when we take those signals, then we start really working on the overall asset allocation. The fancy word to say the investments that you need to be in this environment. And we can start filling out those investments in your portfolio and then ultimately start to have them proactively work for you. So as you can see, this is a very, well, I guess you could definitely say a very quick, down and dirty view of what makes Lions Wealth different than other investment advisory firms, financial planners, and also other wealth managers that are out there. And it comes back down to the investments and how we risk manage the investments to make sure that you can set yourself up for that next leg of growth when it comes. Now, at Lions Wealth, we really want to be creating an impact and helping you create that impact for your family, for your community, and for your company by a well-defined wealth plan. And part of that wealth plan comes back to the investments, and the investments come back to the process, and the process is what separates Lions Wealth from others. Keep that in mind as you are looking around, and as you have questions, feel free to reach out. But also, take a look at some of these other videos that I have here that we have not only surrounding the process, but also many different avenues of where the economy is headed and what that means for you and for your investments. I look forward to seeing you on the next videos.